The MLS Conference Finals are now set, meaning we have just 4 teams remaining. Representing the Eastern Conference are Toronto FC and the Montreal Impact. One way or another, we're about to get our first Canadian team in the MLS Cup final. The Western Conference is represented by the Colorado Rapids and the Seattle Sounders. The Sounders are trying to qualify for their first MLS Cup final, while the Rapids will be attempting to get there for the first time since winning it all in 2010. To help us make sense of all this that we're about to see, I've gathered representatives from the 4 blogs covering these teams: Waking the Red, Mount Royal Soccer, Burgundy Wave, and Sounder at Heart. To get us started, we're gonna talk to Oliver Platt of Waking the Red. First of all, welcome to the show, Oliver.
Thanks.
Got to be pretty exciting for you guys.
It is, yeah. I think no one can quite believe the way it's all just kind of clicked at the right time. We had a pretty bad last month of the regular season. Sebastian Giovinco injured, obviously. Josie Altidore kind of the only real positive of that month. It just wasn't good. But they did manage to avoid defeat a lot of the time, and they've slowly turned it around. They've got Giovinco back. They've got Clint Irwin back in goal as well, which has been a huge thing. And yeah, it's just all seems to be happening at the right time. Players hitting form, players getting fit. It couldn't really have turned out much better at the right time of the season.
Well, you mentioned Sebastian Giovinco, but this is also a team that has Michael Bradley, Josie Altidore. They're coming off a 7-0 dismantling of New York City FC, the biggest blowout in MLS playoff history. Do you think Toronto FC fans believe they are now the favorites to win MLS Cup?
I don't know if anyone would admit it, because this isn't a club that's used to having things go well for them. But I think certainly the feeling you get from a dressing room is that they do. You know, that they want the cup this year. They're not here for like a good run and to pat themselves on the back. I think Michael Bradley probably epitomizes that more than anyone. He's just so locked in at the minute. Every interview you see with him, nothing is going to do for him except going all the way. So I think the belief is definitely growing, but yeah, people don't want to get too carried away with the history that this team has had of pretty much a constant disappointment. But it certainly looks like changing this year.
Yeah. So you mentioned that that past. This is a team that has literally no playoff success coming into this year, and I just have to imagine this is a very strange emotion, and yet it must also feel like you throw that all out the window after the way they played against, in the first 2 rounds essentially.
Yeah, it is. It's a different group. I think Greg Vanney has overseen pretty constant progress over the last couple of years. It's not been all highs. There's been times where he's been questioned and criticized over certain things. But when you take a step back now and look at the big picture over 2 years, it's been really good progress, I think. And they keep taking steps. This year, the big thing was the defense. That's a whole lot better this year than being the worst in MLS last year. And yeah, they're heading in the right direction, whatever happens this year. But it certainly does feel like everything is happening at the right time. And there would even be a little bit of regret, I think, now that they don't take advantage of this year if they go up to Montreal or even in the final.
Yeah, so a team that dates back to 2007. So there's a lot of history there. But most of the players that are on this team, I imagine, I haven't taken a thorough look at the roster, but I'm guessing there aren't a lot of players that have been here more than a couple of years. Do you get a sense that the players carry any of that burden of the past, or does it kind of feel like the stink of history hasn't really got into their uniforms yet?
Not really, I don't think. Like Toronto's record appearance holder in MLS, I think, is Jonathan Osorio, with about 100 or so. So he's really the only one who's been around for any period of time, to be honest. I think they've done a pretty good job, not only in terms of the DPs, but also bringing in guys like Drew Moore and Clint Irwin, who have been around successful clubs in this league and kind of know what it takes a little bit more. So no, I think this is definitely a very fresh team and a fresh club, and not really one that has any association with aside from last year, obviously, in Montreal. But apart from that, I think they've got a pretty new frame of mind.
All right, so we'll finish up with our Toronto FC portion with this question. What's the one thing people should know about Toronto FC going into this this 2-legged final that actually doesn't start until November 20th?
Yeah, I think aside from the obvious of Giovinco and Altidore, I think it's the defense and the strides they've taken this year. That is going to be their difference maker, I think. Drew Moore has come in and just had like an unbelievable impact from where we were last year to having the best defense in the Eastern Conference this year. But I think what people thought would be the weak link in this team was whoever partnered more. And they've gone to a 3 at the back and actually played 2 central defenders, Eric Zavaleta and Nick Hagland. And they've both been terrific. Like, no one really expected the way they're playing. They look like what would be Toronto's downfall, particularly with the way Zavaleta had a really hairy last few weeks of the regular season. And that is kind of getting people believing, I think, because there's not really many big flaws elsewhere in the team. The midfield's good. Jonathan Osorio's scoring, which has been the one thing you could fault him for. The attack we all know about. So I think it's the way the defense is knitted together that is really this team's X factor and what could take it over the edge.
All right, well, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. So next we're going to have Matthew Bouchard, who is a representative of Mount Royal Soccer, which is, of course, SB Nation's Montreal Impact blog. Matthew, first of all, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
So I'm a little disappointed. We have a representative from Toronto FC with an English accent. We have a representative from Montreal Impact that does not have a French accent. What's going on here?
Oui, mais attends, on peut parler en français, hein, mais vous êtes
there we go.
Hey, no, it pays to be bilingual. It pays to be bilingual.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, first of all, it's been kind of amazing to see the Impact all of a sudden going on this run. This is a team that won just 3 of 12 games to end the season, and then they found their form to be 2 of the hottest teams in MLS. More importantly, how did you guys do this without really Didier Drogba and him, with all the seeming distraction at least, of him refusing to play?
Well, that's a really complicated question. So, I mean, just to even go further now with the playoffs, I think we've won now 5 out of the last 7. So we're on a really good run. But the only things that we can really see that changed and potentially helped in that way was we gained a lot of stability down the middle. So we started starting Bernier every game. He didn't get starting time most of the season. Simon, especially after his performance at the Euros, he gained a lot more stability and energy. Donadel, who probably was fighting an injury most of the year, and he's getting on in age. I don't know where he's found his energy, but he's definitely found it now. And then Mancosu. He also, another guy who came out of nowhere, was supposed to be, a temporary replacement for Drogba or for us up front next year. And here he is on fire, really.
Didier Drogba did play this last week. Is that situation finished? Is there a resolution to it? What do we expect from him going forward?
Well, I mean, the way that Drogba seems to be in our time seeing him here in Montreal is that he's a bit of a princess, but then within a day, it's gone. So I don't know how he figures that out in his head. He's very opinionated. He starts some shit, gets into an argument, states his piece, and then within a couple of days, he's open for it to be rectified and everybody to be on the same page. I think that's all he wanted. And I think he would probably, if you put him on the spot and asked him, he would say that maybe that was a mistake. But I would say it's resolved. I mean, just speaking to the reporters, speaking to seeing the interviews with the players and the interviews with Drogba, they're all having fun out there, and I think the locker room is back around as a unit.
And so is he agreed to come off the bench? If I understand correctly, that was the situation that led to all this, was his not starting, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I don't even know if it's the idea of the bench. To be honest, I think he just took a couple of hits to his ego. It could have been the bench. It could have been conversations in the locker room. It could have been anything. It could have been Mancosu having so much success all of a sudden, and he felt like, oh, hold on a second, I'm not as important to this team as I thought I once was. But to be honest, it's resolved, and he has openly admitted multiple times that he's happy to come off the bench. And look at the success he had just in 10 minutes.
Yeah, so the other guy that's driving this team, or the guy who's driving this team, is Ignacio Piatti. He scored 17 goals and had 6 assists in the regular season, and now he scored 3 goals and has another assist in the playoffs. How is it possible that no one seems to know who this guy is outside of Montreal and maybe MLS headquarters?
Well, I mean, one person who knows him very well is the Pope. I don't know if you know that story.
I don't know that story.
No, you don't know that story? Okay, well, the Pope is Argentinian, of course, and his team is San Lorenzo. And Piatti is a god for the San Lorenzo fan base. And so Joey Saputo, our owner, actually went on a trip to the Vatican, met with the Pope after one of his things in St. Peter's Square, and gave him a Nacho Piatti jersey, an Impact jersey, and he took it. So it was, anyways. So the Pope knows who we are, but it seems as though that it's just the Canadian teams don't get much coverage in the United States. So if he played for New York, he'd probably have a lot more coverage. If he played for, LA, if he played for the Sounders, something like that, I think he would be a household name, so to speak. But because he plays in Montreal.
Yeah. I mean, he's an amazing player, and it's every time it seems like he comes up big in big games. He's, someone that I'm amazed, there's all this talk about Sebastian Giovinco getting snubbed for a finalist for MVP, but you look at Piatti's numbers and they're right there with him, and his team wasn't too much worse than Toronto FC. But I digress. We'll finish up with this. What's the one thing people should know about the Impact going into this? What are we calling it? We calling it the Two Solitudes Derby? Or are we calling it the 401 Derby? What's the proper name for this thing?
Well, quick clarification. First of all, the 401 turns into a completely different highway on the Quebec side, so we don't even have a 401 highway.
That's horrible. We can't have that. That's a horrible name.
You can't call it that. The Two Solitudes Derby, it's really good because, quite frankly, it hits at the heart of the history of this kind of thing. But I don't think anybody outside of Toronto and Montreal is going to call it that. They would have no idea what the hell they're talking about. I don't know. I'll go with Two Solitudes.
There you go. Okay, as long as we have a final answer. All right. So thank you for coming on. Of course, that's Matthew Bouchard of Mount Royal Soccer. We're going to switch over to the Western Conference, and Abby Mood of Burgundy Wave, who is our Rapids blogger. So welcome to the show. It's frankly amazing to me that at the beginning of the season, I just thought that the Rapids were going to be contending for the wooden spoon, not be arguing maybe in the driver's seat to go to the MLS Cup final.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone really expected us to be here. It's just been kind of like a great, happy surprise for all of us. Well, for all of us on the Colorado end of things. Right.
So, the big question going into this season seemed to be was Pablo Mastroeni a genius of some sort, but was he actually qualified to be the head coach? That question seems to have been put far in the rearview mirror. But at what point in the season did Rapids fans, because even among Rapids fans, I felt like this was a driving narrative. When did the narrative start to switch that, oh my gosh, Pablo Mastroeni maybe he actually knows what he's doing?
I mean, I think there's still a handful of people out there who are saying, like, let's wait and see what happens, with every step that we go to. And I think some other people are also saying that the Rapids have been winning despite Pablo, not because of Pablo. But I think generally speaking, I think it started to shift in the spring, not too early in the season, because they've been doing really well, obviously, in the beginning of the season. But a lot of people were still kind of waiting to see what happened. And then they just kept winning and kept going unbeaten at home. And I think it's probably started to shift, in that April or May when people started getting excited about Tim Howard. I mean, Jermaine Jones was actually kind of playing. So, yeah. And then in the summer, they kind of went through a stretch where I think people were like, oh, here it is. Now they're going to trash the whole rest of the season. And they pulled it out, and here we are.
So do you think that Pablo Mastroeni is a good head coach then?
I think he makes some questionable decisions with lineups and subs and, that kind of thing. But, I mean, I think considering that when he came in 2014, he had no coaching experience. So I don't really think it was his fault in some ways, because I think he's also done the work to become a better coach. Like, he went over to Europe, in the off season last year and studied with some coaches there. And I think he's really put in the work to become a better coach. And I think that's part of why we are having the success that we're having this year.
So the other big question, and the thing that was debated, frankly, on Burgundy Wave was whether or not Tim Howard was actually a good signing. I know when that signing was first announced, I was among those people saying this is one of the dumbest signings in the history of MLS. You don't pay a goalkeeper millions of dollars to you don't pay a goalkeeper millions of dollars in MLS, was my thinking. And I don't know that statistically, I don't know that he's been an upgrade in any way really over Zach McMath. That said, there's obviously the team is still playing well. He came up with 2 huge saves in the shootout against the Galaxy. It's very possible that they aren't where they are right now without Tim Howard. So where do you fall on this? How good of a signing was Tim Howard question?
I mean, I think maybe even until yesterday, I was still on the fence about it because he did. I mean, Howard and McMath both had 17 games, I think. Howard had 7 shutouts. McMath had 6. Like we had that disaster at NYCFC when Howard came on. So I think that kind of messed up his goals for a bit. But I mean, I think I actually am starting to get on board with that. He brings a level of leadership that maybe McMath didn't have. And I mean, I don't think McMath would have saved the PKs that Howard has saved this year. So I think it's more like that confidence in him as a goalkeeper and him having that experience that I think adds something to his value as well. Because you're right. I mean, as far as the regular season goes, McMath was doing all right. Like we probably didn't need Howard as far as that went. But I think he's saved us some points throughout the season. And like exactly like you said, I don't necessarily think that we would be where we were if it wasn't for him. So I guess I'm on board now.
Off the field, was it I know part of the thinking was that it was going to be kind of a off the field decision as well, that it was about kind of boosting their perception in the community. Has there been much of an attendance bump? What's the mood like among Rapids fans right now in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for sure brought more people to the stadium. And yeah, I mean, he's kind of the face of the Rapids now, which you can take it as like good or bad, I guess. Like people who are just regular soccer fans know who Tim Howard is, and they're coming out to our games just for that reason. Like before, they didn't even know more or less like who the Rapids were, and now Tim Howard's in town. He's a big deal, and he's getting a lot of attention. So I mean, I guess if that was the goal, then if that was part of the goal, then they achieved that. But I don't know I think you could consider that good, or you could consider it not so great to have one kind of like superstar or 2.
Right. So the defense is clearly the thing that's leading the Rapids. They are by far the best defensive team in MLS right now. But how much of a concern is it that only one team has scored fewer goals than the Rapids this year? That even in this series with the Galaxy, they just had that one goal, and it was an absolute amazing goal from 40 yards out. I don't know if it was going to be one of the most amazing goals I've ever seen in MLS playoff history, at least. But how big of a concern is the offense?
I think that's our biggest concern. I mean, I think that's something that they're going to have to address in the offseason, especially considering I am actually really nervous about going to Seattle because Seattle's pretty good at home. And, what they did to Dallas in Seattle. And, if we go down 3-0, the Rapids aren't likely to score 3 goals to come back at home. So I think that is the big concern, and especially now, like Gashi went out with an ankle injury and he got an MRI today, but I don't know what happened with MRI. So hopefully he'll be back because he's our highest goal scorer. I think yesterday was like his 10th goal, which isn't a ton, but so hopefully some other guys will step up a little bit, but yeah, I'm concerned about that too.
So what's the one thing people should know about this Rapids team?
In Colorado, we've all heard it a lot from Pablo and everything, but I think the team doesn't necessarily care that no one else believes in them. Much like some of the other guys were saying, like, we don't get a lot of coverage in the United States, and we're here in the United States, and we're not one of the coast teams. But yeah, people don't believe in the Rapids. They don't think that they deserve to be in the playoffs or that they deserve the cup or anything. But the team really believes in themselves, and that's what they're fighting for each other. I don't think, like, obviously they want it for the fans too, but I don't think they're doing it for anyone else. And I think that's a really powerful position to be coming from.
Well, Abby, thank you very much for joining us. We're gonna close out with Dave Clark from Sounder at Heart, who, if you can tell by this menagerie of scarves in the background, is a team that I have particular interest in. But I'm gonna let Dave talk about this, and I guess I should unmute him. This is there we go, Dave. Welcome to the show. So Dave, here we are. We're in the conference finals. The Sounders have only gotten this far 3 times in their history, and they're doing it in a year where this seemed to be a lost season. I have to imagine it feels a little bit like playing with house money right now.
Anything at this point has to be considered a success. Maybe way back in February and March, the Sounders were MLS Cup favorites, but by July, as things have been in this area for soccer. And then under Brian Schmetzer, Nicolas Lero, they managed to come back nowhere to qualify for the playoffs and then to win. And now it's anything else they do has to be considered. I mean, Joe Roth makes movies that don't have storylines like this.
So the Sounders have gone 10-3-3, I believe it is, since Nico Ladero started playing for them. Is there any reason to think this turnaround isn't just about him?
Well, they switched coaches at the same time. They got Ramon Torres back. They added Alvaro Fernandez, and then they lost Clint Dempsey 4 games into it. It's been kind of a chaotic situation here in the late season because, like any MLS team, they've been struck with injuries. So the primary causes for success are Nicolas Ladero. He's a player that when he has a whole season here will be on an MVP shortlist. But at the same point, the switch from Siggy Schmidt to Brian Schmetzer, and it changed the attitude of the team, are hard to quantify, but are very clear when you see the play on the field.
All right, so you mentioned the Brian Schmetzer addition. What is the biggest change that you've seen the Sounders make since Brian Schmetzer became the head coach back in July?
The tactics have simplified a little bit, which is kind of funny. Siggy isn't known as a complex tactical genius or something like that, but he liked to give a lot of room to players, whereas simplified things. The biggest thing that he's gotten is he had this team playing with a belief in themselves and a responsibility to themselves and their fellow teammates. He places everything on the players and not on himself. Coaching staff executing, it's about the players on the field executing, but with owning that and with doing so. I think it's kind of notable when they succeed. They're generally, I'm not a fan of goal celebration analysis, but when they score, it's the entire team and the bench. And then now they've started hands. They did so in their big win over here in Seattle over Dallas. And then Nico Ladero sought out the away fans, giving high fives and making certain that it was the fans that felt welcomed. Schmetzer preaches with that he knows better than anybody is that the Sounders' relationship with their fan base is what makes this a club.
So this is the first time the Sounders have made it to the conference finals where they won't be facing the LA Galaxy. In a way, that's, I'm sure, a huge relief. But in another way, it feels like it maybe adds pressure. And then all of a sudden, there's a mindset that, well, the team that we have to beat is no longer the big, bad, Darth Vader of the league. It's a team that we should be able to stand toe-to-toe with. Is that – do you think –
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
I think the fans might overlook Colorado a little bit. Their championship is one of those that people like to point out as but heck, let's look at the Sounders now. If they qualify, they're a low seed that wins. If it's kind of the same thing. So yeah, they're gonna fans here are overlooking the Rapids. Personally, I would have liked to have faced the LA Galaxy. I kind of want to. I'm tired of the bitterness in my mouth. The Galaxy so often, so I would have liked to have been able to see them in the playoffs and knock them off. But at this point, you just have to keep on winning, and that needs to be, if the fans are focused on anything, it's got to be loud and be what Seattle sports are known for, that kind of volume.
All right, so what's the one thing that people should know about the Sounders going into this this conference final that starts on November 22nd?
Had a lot of secondary and tertiary players step up. Nelson Hedo Valdez was considered one of the worst DP signings in league history, and all of a sudden he looks like a brilliant goal scorer. Jovan Jones is playing on a broken foot, and he's a key assist man coming from left back. You look at players like Alvaro Fernandez are performing when he's on the field, or shuffled to the bench, and seems to be accepting that. It's a lot of players that Nico Ladero is doing extraordinarily well, but it's that are kind of carrying this team. There's a lot of distribution. I think in some ways that's similar to what you're seeing in Colorado. It's not just one guy as the reason for success. It's been a team effort, and even Tyrone Mears is now contributing with assists. So it's kind of a unique thing here. It's a way that the Sounders can play, but it's not something that we've seen this year until actually the playoffs. Well,
Dave, thanks so much for joining us on here. Again, that's Dave Clark of Sounder at Heart, Abby Mood of Burgundy Wave, Matthew Boucher. Boucher, is that right? I should bring you back on here and make sure I got your name right. Bouchard. I just butchered that. That was horrible. Matthew Bouchard of Mount Royal Soccer and Oliver Platt of Waking the Red. SB Nation will be covering the Western Conference Finals from here until all the way through the MLS Cup. So hopefully you'll be able to find everything you need. Thanks again. I'm Jeremiah O'Shan, and hopefully we'll be doing this again sometime.
Thanks, guys.